Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host, and we have the continuation of a very special series on the revenue logic of customer obsession. And we have with us Bettina Berntsen. And Bettina, you're not only a three-time B2B CMO, you spent your whole career in B2B and in tech, but you also have very much been hired for this, a focus not only on obviously lead generation, everything marketing is supposed to do on that front, but all the way through outcomes, right? Not just pipeline focus, but actually how do we land deals? How do we keep deals? How do we focus on things like NRR? These are really important things that as marketers, we're being asked to think about, but not all of us do in the way that our CEOs or our CFOs or the board want to. That can be a really important part of our conversation. But what's interesting is you're a living case study of customer obsession. You doubled down on it and you're now reaping the benefits. You're actually seeing the impact on the pipeline and outcomes. So this is a mini case study on the revenue logic of customer obsession. I'm really excited to get going here. And what I'd love to do is give you an opportunity to expand a little bit more on your background and what I didn't cover before we get started.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Steve. Really great to be here and hopefully share some insights for the audience. But I work as CMO in SuperOffice. It's a CRM company, and we're on a mission to become Europe's most loved CRM. And I would say we are quite on a good way to get there. As you say, we work across the whole customer journey, or as we say in SuperOffice, the relationship loop, all the way from finding them to keeping the customers and having them become advocates.
So what I love is that not only are you a big believer as a CMO in this, but as a CRM company, understanding the customer journey, tracking the customers, the conversation, what's happening there, the data that you collect now and help us as CMOs or C-suite executives in B2B companies is so important. So I just wanted to say that. Another reason why I'm excited to talk here about it. But here's what I'd love to do. I would love to hear your philosophy of just how you connect revenue. What is the revenue logic in your mind on customer obsession? How does customer obsession impact growth, revenue of the business?
Yeah. I think a big question, but a really important one for me is definitely not just believing your own assumptions, but truly using the data you have at hand, but also going out to seek the truth among the customers that you are selling to and among the ideal customer profile, so that you always take outset in the customer wants and needs and not just assume that what they want at any given point in time. That's integrated not only in marketing, but how we do product development, how we develop our sales methodology, et cetera, et cetera.
At one level, I hear what you're saying and I'm thinking, absolutely, 100%, right? On the other level, that's what we learned in Marketing 101 when we're in school, right? Why is it so important? And to underscore this, I ask everybody that comes onto the podcast, and we have a whole conversation in advance. And I always started out by saying, what do you think are the two greatest challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth, right? And a lack of deep understanding of the voice of the customer is number two behind internal alignment. And everyone agrees that the voice of the customer is the number one way to get that internal alignment. And so when you and I were talking before on the prep call, you said that voice of the buyer, gaining those insights, but not just giving it lip service, right? Gaining the insights proactively, not just relying on kind of what happens in the commercial process of the go-to-market strategy and what do we hear and let's listen and see what we can do with it. But you actually are very proactive with it. Why are those insights so important? And why is being so proactive about getting them? When we have customer success talking to customers, we have sales talking to customers all the time. What is your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I think having, like you say, having sales reps speaking to the customer every day, having customer success, having support speaking to customers every day, the results of that insight is very important. It kind of enables you to keep finger on the pulse. But I also believe that you have to even look at it in the bigger picture because, for example, in a sales rep call, you are discussing maybe contracts or more short-term things. How is onboarding going, etc. But when we build the GTM strategy and the plan for this year, for beyond next year and onwards, it's also about understanding the big picture. What is our ideal customer profile? What are they worried about? How are they planning for growth in the coming years? How are they feeling and thinking about AI? Should we become the AI first CRM? Or should we become the CRM that our ICP really wants and needs, where they have certain AI capability that helps them solve really concrete challenges? And that's just one example of how we combine the voice of the customer in the daily with quite extensive market research within the ICP, talking to those who are not customers today, but that we want to become customers today. And then truly tailoring the GTM to that, because then we also know we're answering the pains, also the opportunities that the customers want to grasp.
So to accentuate what you're talking about here, like McKinsey did a study a few years back, and they came up with the fact that only 15% of companies actually use the voice of the customer in their strategic decision-making process. You know, so what you're doing is not something that's just a basics. You're not relying on what's just there and easy to grab. And even that, taking transcripts from sales conversations, hugely important. Customer success conversations, hugely important. Doing the market research, right? I think McKinsey in a different study said that 90% of the data that we have is unstructured, is conversational data. But just bringing that together, spanning across fragmented silos of information and bringing it together, but making sure that you're doing your own primary research and talking to customers, that's what I took away. If you could, just before we go too much farther, and I don't want you to release any numbers or anything, but I said up front that you're a good case study, that you're actually seeing it hit the pipeline, you're seeing outcomes happen without the numbers or anything. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and why the rest of the company's so excited, the board's excited about what you're doing?
Yes, definitely. So one of the key things that we did across the company was when we laid out in creating our new growth strategy, our next, journey, and we're in it right now. But it was to align on what are our KPIs that will tell us if we are on the right path. And of course, one of them is, okay, what's pipeline? How is ARR growth, etc. But we were equally interested in understanding how is the PMPS increasing? How is the RNPS increasing? Is it increasing? Or let's say if it's a month where it's stagnating, okay, why is that? We need to go back, we need to look. But what's then interesting to see is from that perspective, that has increased consistently over time. And that's because we truly bring in the customers when it comes to listening. How's the relationship going? How are we maintaining and building our relationship? How are you liking the product? Are we prioritizing the right things? And then from a marketing point of view, what we're seeing is that not only have we been able to create more pipeline within net new business over, now I've been in SuperOffice for 2 years, year over year, but we've also been able to increase the deal size and increase where in the ICP we hit. So that tells me that, okay, we have done some really great things that are showing in the outcomes that we are on the right path. Without disclosing numbers, I think that's also like telling the truth that we made some good decisions and we've also stuck by them.
So I have to ask, because nothing like that ever happens. And you use the word aligned in what you were just saying there, unless the entire company, the C-suite with the board, everybody is aligned, right? And that's really difficult to do. Just like listening to the voice of the customer, right? And it's actually the number one challenge, not only in my own survey of C-suite executives, but I talk to go-to-market consultants and partners in those consulting companies that deal with hundreds of companies. And they said, that's always the first place we look, right? But you talk very positively about how you were able to align and it wasn't pulling teeth, right? And that the voice of customer was a real important part of that. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened internally and why it went so well on alignment?
Yeah, definitely. And before I do that, I think just sharing, one of my greatest learnings within this topic is assuming that everyone outside your function either don't care about what you do or they should understand. what we're doing because, it's really important and we have a good plan. So taking a step back and prioritizing both time and capacity to ensure that you bring your peers with you and explaining the why. Why are we doing it and why are we doing it this way? So truly prioritizing that has been such an important learning, but also an important priority to make. But then to answer your question, why it hasn't been hard to convince people to get on board on the path and the strategy that we have is that we did take outset in the voice of the customer and not just, transcript calls or our own CRM data, but we combined all of that, but also with the market research where those we want to sell to also told us, yeah, this is how we are buying CRM systems. This is the type of functionality that we want. This is what's most important to us. This is how we believe we should grow in the future. And this is some of our greatest challenges, etc. And then combining all of these things into one thing is the strategy itself, but also the internal narrative that you keep repeating to your colleagues to then explain the why. Why are we doing it this way and not that way, or jumping on every single trend? No, it's because this is what the market has told us. This is what our current customer have told us. And this is what our own data tells us. And in combination, this is the path that we should go down. At least in my experience, that has resonated very well with the organization. In our prep call, we also discussed positioning. And we did a big project last year where we refined our positioning. We didn't do a full rebrand because we learned that wasn't necessary. It was necessary that we did something. We became clearer and had a stronger position. Who are we and who are we for and what are we solving for? And also to, again, take outset in the voice of the customer, the voice of the market, and the ICP that we're serving made it so much easier to bring everyone on board and also to ask for people's thoughts and opinions and perspectives. If they weren't met, they understood why. There's a group of customers and ICP prospects over here that tells us this. And that's what we need to move towards.
In one of our previous conversations, you said something that really stood out to me. You said you actually have sales a lot of the time coming to you and asking, how do we, I forget how you phrase it, learn more or understand better? Instead of pushing something on different departments, you invoked curiosity. People wanted to learn more because they wanted to be able to serve the client better. I'm not articulating it well. How would you articulate what actually happened in that interdepartment kind of interaction?
Yeah, so how we came to create a strategy, create the plan is definitely internal involvement. So it's not just something we create in marketing and then it's like, here, you have to go spread the word. This is great. We know it. You might not, but it's great. I think internal involvement and of course, being very close to sales to understand what their challenges are, what are they hearing every day, and also pick up on some of the trends that we're seeing from them. But then combining that again with, okay, we know right now in Europe, for example, we know that European hosted the software, super important. Local regulations, super important. How to adopt AI and just how to grasp that opportunity in a compliant and good way, super important. When we then create content around that and we have product launches and how we position, I just feel it resonates very well with also what they are hearing in customer calls. In that way, we're able to, piggyback on each other. Sales, they really want to engage with the assets we create. They use them not only on LinkedIn, but in customer conversation when the BDRs are cold calling or working with signals. I think we've managed to create truly a good marketing and sales alignment. And I know that's quite rare.
Very rare. And here's the underlying current that I'm hearing under this. The third challenge on that, to answer the question, what are your top two challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth, was creating internal and external trust. What I was just hearing you by taking the voice of the customer, working and involving the different departments, understanding what they're hearing from the customer, what you're hearing from the customer, what our internal objectives are, what their objectives are, but working together to arrive at a final decision in terms of, okay, here is how we're going to move forward. Here is our unique go-to-market strategy. That meant you built trust internally. You didn't just come up with it from on high and say, hey, everybody, here's what it's all about, which I think a lot of departments feel like happens a lot of the time, and they don't feel involved. Do you feel like building that trust internally was well worth the time and effort? Because you got a lot. You're a chief marketing officer. There's not a lack of things for you to do, but it seems like that rose up pretty high on the priority list. Was it worth it?
Yes, yes. It was, yeah, it was so worth it to take the time not only to do the work, but also to understand and do the discovery first. What is it that my peers in other functions might not understand about what we're doing? What are they skeptical about? Or what do they believe is right? Truly be curious to understand that. And I also think then, not just speaking to the sales directors or the CCO or country directors, but what I did was like, hey, we're coming to all of you, all markets, all employees, and we want to explain and put this forward with a language that is common for all. No CTR or SOV or MQLs, but in plain language. Why are we doing what we're doing, and what's the plan, and what do we need from you, and what do you think about it?
So here's another area that is typically very hard, that marketing has to think a lot about long-term focus as well as short-term pipeline attainment. Typically, the sales team is going to be more focused on short-term because there's like a quota, right? When we go into the board meetings, usually it's all about, hey, what does this quarter look like? What's next quarter looking like? It's not, hey, Bettina, how's that long-term brand building process going and building trust with our customers? Tell us about that, right? It's important we know it, even if we're not being really held accountable to it. How did you bridge that gap internally? The last thing I'll say here is I had on about a year and a half ago a CMO, three-time CMO as well. And she said, the way that I think about it is that today's brand is tomorrow's demand. You can't have the demand short-term today if you're not seeding the demand and building the awareness and the trust in the marketplace. How do you think about the bridging the two long-term, short-term objectives, and how do you do it in a way that everybody buys in internally?
Yeah, that's a big one. And I think, as you say, it's a challenge for any CMO. But again, taking outset in the customer voice, understanding that 2 years ago, it wasn't super clear who we were and who we were for. And why should our ICP look to us first? Why should we be on their day one list, for example? But understanding and knowing that, and then going on to clarify and strengthen the positioning, strengthen our own narrative, and also uniting around one common story that not only marketing tells, but everyone in the company tells. We're not telling 100 different stories, but that's the theoretical work. And then you need to put it to life. And I think finding or striking that balance between capturing demand and generating the demand with brand is tricky. And I also think it shifts. It's not a constant, but what I've found that has been useful, one thing is to clarify the positioning and the brand and the narrative and everything, but also finding ways to experiment, because you might have a hypothesis. And if you're asking for X million dollars to test it in a small SMB, small SaaS company, for example, it's not an immediate yes. But then finding some ways where you could, okay, we could experiment with this, and we need to do it over time to see if we can get some indications if we're on the right track. And we did that. We chose one of our core markets here in Europe. We singled them out, worked really closely with the country management and the sales teams. And we said, hey, if we want to become more known to the ICP in this market, and we have X budget to test it, we have some KPIs that can tell us and indications, and we need to figure out exactly which audience that we want to be on the day one list on tomorrow and in the months and in the years to come. We did that. And after we ended the experiment, and it's brand, so it's still going on, but after we had set, okay, after X time, we will evaluate, the results were through the roof. They were mind-blowing. I was like, okay, this is crazy, because from a brand awareness and top of mind point of view, it's not necessarily translating into pipeline right away. But in addition to exceeding the brand KPIs that we had set, we could see like immediate correlation also on pipeline generation from the channels we were running this experiment in. So that told us that, okay, not only are we more visible and more top of mind to the target audience that we want to be in front of, but we have now effectively also increased our pool of companies that we can capture demand from. And that's the thing, balancing that creation of the pool of audience and then efficiently capturing it is so important. And then showing that experiment with the results to the organization, to the board, to the management team, the conversation is much different than saying, I believe we should invest in brand because I know it's important and it does take time, etc. But that was great learnings to have a very fruitful conversation around the next steps.
We hear reports like Sixth Sense saying the day one shortlist that you talked about there, it's on average 4 to 5 vendors. It gets locked on day one. And 95% of the time, the vendor that wins the deal was on that short list. So if you're not on the short list, you're out. And what you just proved is spending the time and the resources to build awareness and trust in advance of the day one has direct pipeline implications. If I could take our whole conversation, building that awareness and trust was founded on your understanding the voice of the customer and what they truly needed. It wasn't just build awareness and trust, it was do it this way. So if I put it all together, our entire conversation, is that the revenue logic of customer obsession? End to end? I have never had it explained so succinctly, and especially with your own test data that proved the correlation between using the voice of the customer, building brand, doing the work in advance. I hear all the time, I had a 4-time B2B CMO said, CRO, and he said, Steve, if we're not out talking to them a year in advance, we've lost the deal. By the time we start to see the intent signals and they issue an RFP, like they know who's on their short list. And if we get included at that point, we're the spoiler that's there to be able to say, these guys can do it at this price and they do this, but they're not really considering us. So doing the work in advance, connecting, and there's a lot that's been written lately on the rise of the brand. If you break it down at the very basics, brands are trust marks. What we're really saying is, how do we develop awareness and trust in our brand in advance of them really making their decision? Because if we're not in that set where they know and trust, we're out. So I just wanted to say thank you for being very eloquent about that. What am I missing? Did I miss a component of that? In this equation of the revenue logic of customer obsession, what haven't I asked? What haven't we talked about? Or did we talk about it all? Are we leaving anything out?
No, I think we've touched upon definitely the most important things. One of the things that could be interesting to hear also other perspectives on is, in this AI era, we've talked a little bit about trust, building trust, and also then the consistency and the continuation also of that conversation in the revenue logic perspective could be really interesting to hear. And I guess one of the final things for me as well is building the trust with the customer, truly listening to the customers when you build your GTM and the strategy and everything. But we have also seen from then a product and customer experience perspective that we were recently awarded top CRM in the Nordics on G2 of our customers. So that's just another testament that tells me that, okay, we are doing the right things, because at the end of the day, our customers are noticing and are also taking the time to tell us. I think that's also a valuable thing in this attention economy.
So I'm going to ask you the toughest question so far, which is this. We've covered a lot of territory here, but if there was one thing that you wanted your C-suite peer community to be taking away from our conversation, what's that one most important thing?
That's a difficult one. The one most important thing is not to say that you're customer obsessed, but make sure that you truly are in how you're building your GTM strategy and function.
I love it. It's easier to say you're customer obsessed than to be customer obsessed. Don't believe what I say, but what I do, right? As our actions prove it. Every single one of us would say we're customer obsessed, we're customer driven, but it really is the rare few. And to accentuate your point there, when Forrester did a customer obsession study a couple of years ago, they found that only 3% of companies were actually customer obsessed. But the ones that were had a 41% faster revenue growth, 49% faster profit growth, and had much, much better, 51% better retention of customers. Everything you're saying here is validated by the outside world, by the leading analysts in the world that focus on our industry, that the revenue of logic of customer obsession, you live it, you feel it, you proved it. And it's only substantiated by the analysts that spend their life analyzing our entire industry and all the companies within it. I just wanted to say the mission of this podcast is to bring different unique perspectives together in a way that we can really understand and take notes and have action steps afterwards. And if we can do that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were truly amazing at it today. I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It was a really good conversation.